Hello everyone, my name is Mojca Hrabar and I'm an evaluator from Slovenia. I work for Oikos, it's a small consultancy, and I'm going to present you, let's say, a GIS-based method which we used for assessment of contribution of RDP to biodiversity, specifically because we have time limit today. I will focus on measure 214, so AgriEnvironment measures. I will just firstly present you briefly some context, just to understand where we are and where we work, let's say in what kind of frame of mind or environment. Then I present the method. Then at the end I will talk a bit about data requirement for this approach, strengths, weaknesses, and the potential for further use. I try to think of the context in other countries. So, the program that we are evaluating is, of course, Rural Development Program of Slovenia, 2007-2013. Slovenia is a chicken-shaped country, eastern neighbor of Italy, and it's smaller than Sicily, about 20,000 square kilometers. While Sicily is 25,000 square kilometers, so that we have a kind of picture in mind. RDP was quite big, over 1 billion, 200,000, and more than 50% of funding was spent on Axis 2. So it was 625 million was spent on Axis 2. The evaluation started in January and it's planned to be finished in November. We have just submitted the interim report and we are evaluating the period until December of 2015, except for the measure 214. We don't have the data yet for the 2015. And we tried, of course, to build on the famous guidelines of which we talked today. Just for the wider context, the managing authority has not put any special focus, so we had quite free hands, let's say, to just follow the guidelines. There's no specific focus, although we are trying to do quite a bit of spatial analysis in terms of how different regions used the funds, how the funds were used in different regions. Just for the context, as I said, just to present briefly farming in Slovenia, I'm not sure how many of you have been there. It's mostly really small farms, so average size is 6.6 hectares, and it's relatively extensive farming, mostly mixed farming systems, so small scale, extensive, mixed, but increasingly intensified. Also, I guess, with the investments of RDP, supported by RDP. And increase, on one hand, we have seen some specialization into one direction. On the other hand, we have also quite strong diversification on farms. Intensive farming is mostly concentrated in the plains, like Vibha Valley over there on the left, where there's more kind of easily arable land or easier farming, while most of the country is quite hilly, mountainous, and so on. In terms of biodiversity, Slovenia is quite a hot spot. There's many natural factors. We have very diverse soil, bedrock, diverse terrain. We have strong karstic features, especially in the southwest. For example, there on the left, it's Škocjanske Jame UNESCO park. That dark spot over there is not a lake or a pond, it's a sinkhole. So there you have to take care that you don't fall in the ground. You can imagine the soil is very thin. So intensive farming is not really, and there's almost no water, so intensive farming is kind of no-go. On the other hand, we have also some wetlands, wet meadows, and so on. Very diverse systems. This makes us coming on the top of proportion of Natura 2000 sites in member states. 38% of area of the total land is in Natura 2000. So basically it's hard to avoid it. Yeah? Hard to avoid being in a Natura 2000 area. As soon as you are outside of the cities, of the towns, you are almost certainly in Natura 2000. So this looked a bit like tourist advert, so let's move back to work. Where does biodiversity come in at the evaluation? Well, if we look at the evaluation questions 3 and 16, biodiversity is an important natural resource. So its conservation is quite important for rural development program of Slovenia, and of course then also for ex post evaluation. And we have in fact 4 evaluation questions that are related to biodiversity. 2 were set by the managing authority. One wants to follow a bit, one wants to check how the RDP helped to implement Slovenian agricultural policy, which also has some preservation of natural resources there. And the second is what level, what is the total area in areas of high nature value on the level of Slovenia. But the common evaluation questions 3 and 16 are the ones that I'm going to present today, with more focus on evaluation question 16. How and to what extent has the measure contributed to improving the environmental situation? Because this is a measure-related question. And in terms of environmental situation, here we are looking at biodiversity. In terms of evaluation criteria for answering these evaluation questions, we have built actually on the old evaluation questions that we used in midterm evaluation, so that we can kind of provide a timeline through past assessments. We will be looking at similar things, similar issues, so that we can then also compare to the assessment in the past. So, now to the method of assessment. We combined several approaches, and we based everything on the assumption that some of the sub-measures of agri-environment measure directly support biodiversity, and some others only indirectly. And we assume that the contribution can be assessed by analyzing how the measure was implemented and comparing this to biodiversity data, biodiversity information that we have. We have the data for 2007-2014, and we shall see whether, I don't have really information yet, but we could try also to look back in the 2004 to 2007 period, just to have the background information. So, let me present the key steps. First, we did just a simple literature review, just to see what data are available. And here, of course, from RDP implementation, we have the monitoring data of high nature value index and the bird farmland index, which are very useful, at least on general level. Bird farmland index reports also have very specific data, which can be really used kind of on land parcel level. Then we have Natural Institute of Nature Conservation, which does the monitoring of Natura 2000. They have collected quite good set of data for the Natura 2000 reporting, which had to be done by the end of 2013, so there's quite a rich set of data. They're also implementing monitoring for the key species or key habitats over the years. And most of this data is also in GIS format, so we can get the GIS with the database behind it, which is very useful. We can, to some extent, also use the data of authorities of various protected areas, but their quality and setup is quite variable. So they can be kind of a help, but not primary source. Then we had a look at the implementation of Measure 214, AgriEnvironment. It had 23 submeasures. We checked their characteristics, their criteria for implementation, their obligations, and so on. There were 3 groups of submeasures. The first one was quite general, more focused on general reduction of negative impacts of agriculture on the environment, such as, I don't know, crop rotation, greening of arable land, integrated farming, various aspects of integrated farming. And we decided to scope them out, not to deal with them, because their contribution is quite weak and indirect. So we focused mostly on Group 2 and Group 3. Group 2 was focusing on conservation of natural resources, biodiversity, soil, cultural landscape. While the Group 2 were more broad measures, let's say, still, but focusing also on conservation of biodiversity, while Group 3 was really specific, focusing really on conservation of biodiversity, mostly focused on protected areas. So this was our focus. Here I have a list of submeasures that we selected as the ones that have potentially strong contribution to biodiversity. Mostly they deal with different types of meadows, so grassland, karst pastures, steppe meadows, mountain pastures, and so on. Some genetic biodiversity conservation. This was assessed in a different way, not with GIS, of course, and so on. So we looked at these ones primarily. Especially Group 3 targets specific habitats. Then we analyzed the data on implementation with GIS. We had the LP's data of recipients, and we looked where have they been implemented. So I have a map here of the chicken-shaped country. The yellow areas and the blue areas are Natura 2000. Don't get confused by the blue. The blue is extension, enlargement of Natura 2000 that was done in 2013, which we will also have to consider. There was policy change, let's say. So a lot of Natura 2000 and all these black dots and red dots, these are the LPs areas supported by these, let's say, biodiversity supporting measures. Yeah? So here, a big concentration over here, here, here. The red ones are red just to stress that these are in, aha, okay, great, thanks. Thank you. That these are in Natura 2000 areas. Then we made a comparison of these data on submeasures with the data on nature conservation. So we tried to see if the areas under the selected submeasures are maybe higher in biodiversity and if there is any change, any trend. So are these submeasures where they are implemented supporting, increasing biodiversity, or at least keeping it on a constant level? Because the indicators are actually showing a steady decline. So even keeping it level would be beneficial. The other question is also whether they are implemented in areas where it's most needed. So if we look back, if we say that Natura 2000 areas are where biodiversity needs to be preserved because there are species of EU importance, are the measures contributing heavily to that, or are they helping biodiversity outside of these areas? So here we combine this data from LPs with GIS data from Natura 2000 monitoring on species and habitats. We have also for each species, we'll see later, the sort of so-called distribution zones, exactly like where they can be found. And we use the data from FBI index and so on. But okay, so the country is not very big, but it's still big to analyze so many data. So we decided to pick 2 case studies. One is Ljubljana Marshland. This is a picture from there. It's just south of Ljubljana. You cross the ring road of Ljubljana and you're here with wet feet. This is mostly wet meadows, let's say forests, and so on. Highly threatened by, you can imagine, appetites for build-up and so on. But it has been preserved as a landscape park since 2008. Another policy change that has happened during RDP implementation. Goričko is a park in the head of the chicken, let's say, to the northeast, on the border with Austria and Hungary. It's also trilateral park, so we are going to see there the data which the park authorities have collected. For Ljubljana or Marshland, I have here some images. We did the land use analysis, so we can see here brown are the fields, the arable land. The green is mostly grassland, wet meadows. Blue, there are some blue dots which are bogs, and so on. And here I have an analysis on LPs from different submeasures. The green ones are the group 2, very general, quite general, and the blue ones are group 3. So we can see where the measure was implemented. We can also see the changes in land use and habitat quality. So there are areas where fields were turned into grassland, and these were quite often included in these farmers often entered the AgriEnvironment measure. Quite a lot of the cases, the grassland was turned into fields because it's more profitable, let's say. And in the next step, we will just compare these data from LPs and so on with more detailed data on distribution of species, like corncrake, highly endangered. This is its core area, but we saw that agri-environment measures are mostly implemented in other parts. So we'll try to see if there's any correlation. We also had a focus group with stakeholders, and we're planning to do one at the end, towards the end of evaluation. And we'll possibly do a survey among the recipients about the observed effects and also administrative measures, let's say, administrative aspects. What did they find maybe difficult? Why maybe they didn't extend the 5-year period or something like that. I talked already about the information sources. There are key 3 data sets: LPs, Natura 2000, and land use mapping, which is done every 3 to 4 years. And we just could join these in GIS. We Slovenes are usually very critical, but I have to stress the positive experience that data sharing here was not a problem. It was easily obtainable in the format that we wanted. The only bottleneck was the resources, human resources, where the people in the authorities had to dedicate time to provide us with, extract the data for us. The challenges are that there are some inconsistencies in data, especially for for nature biodiversity monitoring. There's a lot of data. You can imagine that once you put this in GIS, it just goes zip, zip, zip for 4 or 5 hours. And this is quite time consuming, and you have to have good skills as well. So far, we found that the areas under these measures decreased gradually, mostly after the end of 5-year periods. And the decrease was actually the largest in more demanding submeasures. So this group 3, just because there was a lot of obligations and not so much money. So people preferred to make a general measure, submeasure, where there's less money but also less obligation, and they can sleep more easily. So there are also some submeasures that could have even harmful effects. for example, like sustainable livestock farming, it could actually decrease the quality of meadows where it was implemented. And actually populations of highly specialized species show decline despite all these measures. For example, corncrake, it's declining. So despite the fact that it's of all the awareness raising measures and implementing of agri-environment measures and so on. So now to strengths of the method used. There is potential for counterfactuals because you can combine the country level data on Natura 2000 and LPs and combine data under a submeasure with data on areas outside of submeasures. And you can also build on nature conservation data to inform both agricultural policy and nature conservation policy. And here I must again praise the authorities, nature conservation authorities, that they are very cooperative. After all, they have to implement Natura 2000 management plans, and they will gladly use the results. Other strength is that we are using the databases that are already there, which are sustainable because the monitoring has to be done for EU reporting. You can expect that the data will be there in cyclic period. And the key is, as long as you have software and knowledge, you can use the data, transfer the knowledge, and so on. On the other hand, we have also weaknesses. There's some, in terms of counterfactuals, sometimes maybe results could not be robust enough, or they're on too small scale to really be scaled up. And this is maybe not very useful for countries which have very small amount of Natura 2000, small amount of nature conservation data sets, because then you have just small patches and you cannot really compare. Data processing, I already said, it's demanding in terms of knowledge and time. And I praise the databases, but on the other hand, you again rely on them. What else? Natura 2000 was actually used as a proxy for biodiversity, which is maybe not such a good idea. In Slovenia, it really largely corresponds. Also, protected areas are largely within Natura 2000 areas. We captured everything that we could. That's why we have such a big percentage. But on the other hand, also biodiversity is important also on local scale, which is maybe outside of Natura 2000 areas. So our proxy is a proxy. It doesn't really tell you about the biodiversity. In terms of lessons and recommendations on the application of the method, it can help at least with answering the evaluation question 16 and 3. It really needs cooperation of different authorities to use the existing monitoring, because you can imagine monitoring of biodiversity is very time consuming and expensive. So you just have to build on that and make sure that the databases and the approach of the authorities are compatible, that they all see kind of a win-win situation from sharing the data in a structured, compatible way. So compatible databases should be built in GIS in terms of monitoring, which bring more qualitative information linked to GIS data. And I think the combination of information from various sources was quite essential. And case studies are actually the ones that can maybe verify or illustrate further the points, the findings. I think also in the new programming period, maybe the method could be used also for monitoring of contribution of Pillar 1. So greening, one aspect, checking the one aspect of greening, and so on. And this is also quite a kind of one of the questions that could be discussed. And the big issue for us is actually how to net out the effects of other measures and other factors that influence biodiversity. I mean, for example, Axis 1 measures, here we were looking only on these measures which were designed to enhance, protect biodiversity. What about the investments which actually help intensification? And here with help of LPs and some proxy approaches, let's say, we could check that as well. So that's it. I hope I'm within 20 minutes. Thank you.
So if you just present yourself quickly.
Hello, thank you. Jerry Lawson from the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology in Edinburgh in Scotland. Still part of the European Union, thankfully. Just to complement the presentation, it's wonderful to see all these different data sets being used and being compared and being integrated. Would you like to comment just on how that is used in Slovenia? Because many countries keep the LPS data completely confidential. I understand you have a portal and farmers can look at that information themselves. So could you just say whether that's been used effectively? Also, I was wondering, because you were looking at two measures. One was the impact on biodiversity on high nature value farming and on forestry. Did you look, in doing that, did you look at trees outside the forest? Because for the creation of biodiversity, the small-scale patches of trees and hedges and lines of trees are very, very important. Usually people have not measured those, and that is another tremendous potential advantage of using the LPS data. And that also relates to the greening question. So lines of trees, for example, in Slovenia, I think are measured as landscape features. So are you starting to quantify those lines of trees outside the forest?
Hello, yeah, thanks very much for the presentation. I'm very glad that to hear your approach and to be able to ask some questions and talk about it. I'm Nina Weber. I work as freelance evaluator in Austria, and I do evaluations for environmental issues. The first question I have, this analysis of LPS data, did you do them for the whole of the country or only for your case studies? And if you did them for the whole country, how did you cope with server capacities? It's a very practical question. The second question is, if you only did them for case studies, how did you select the areas? Because in the beginning you mentioned that Slovenia has a very high structural diversity, so how did you select case study areas? And the last question, a question I have been thinking about and I haven't come up with a solution for. How did you cope with evaluating efficiency for environmental questions? Thank you.
Hello, thank you very much for the presentation. I'm Rosa Mosqueta from the European Agroforestry Federation. I'd like to congratulate you because you took the most difficult measure that I have never seen. We are working with a European project and we are doing some evaluation across national evaluation about agroforestry. And well, I just like to mention that you are working with the measure 214, which is the one that is mostly used to promote agroforestry through Europe. But I also like to point out that what you have mentioned, that is that so another axis also promotes biodiversity. So what we have found is that the same measure could be, the same activity can be promoted or funded by different axes. The same thing can be affected by different measures in the same rural development program. And the same aspect, like for example, landscape features, which are related with isolated trees, hedge rows, and so are mixed within the conditionality, the greening, the CAP, the Pillar 1, and also the different measures of Pillar 2. So I'd like to know how you and the rest of the rural development managing authorities handle with that, because at the end, what we should to evaluate within the Pillar 2 is the sustainability of our systems and the contribution that they do for the biodiversity and the sustainability of them. So I'd like to have some comment on that. Thank you very much.
Actually, it's very good to see that you have projects which use GIS data, because it's extremely valuable, and I think it's a really future in terms of evaluation to use this data to such an extent that really makes the difference. No? But actually in your presentation, I have not seen this difference, and I have not seen that you are using this GIS data in a proper way. I would say that to say something about Natura 2000 and not Natura 2000, you don't need any GIS data. It's sufficient that you have a clear location where the support was given, in Natura region or non-Natura 2000 region. You don't need any GIS. GIS data should be used to build different types of controls, like, for instance, distance to forest, distance to cities, sort of how urban or level of urbanization of the area, etc., etc. So it means that you should use these variables as controls to see whether firms which were located also in the same regions, but without support, receive better results. Yes, and I understand that you are computing results not at the. I have not understood it. At which level you are computing results? At the level which is very closely related to the beneficiary, or at the regional level? At which level your results are computed? So these diversity indicators are built at which level?
Individual recipients.
Recipients, okay. So close, let's say in the close neighborhood of those who received. So especially in this situation, you should use GIS data to control for these different specificities. So you should have farms which are very similar in terms of location, in terms of GIS location, yes, but were not supported. And then you can use sophisticated methods, advanced methods, to analyze the results. And this I don't see in your presentation, because actually this would be the core, the essence of the use of GIS data. This is the advantage, the very advantage.
First, for the question from Scotland. We are working with LPS information that was obtained from paying agency. So we have full data set, let's say, of all the information, including the addresses, the ID of farms and so on. But this information is, let's say, almost all of this information is publicly available. There is a LPS viewer that is accessible on the website of the Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry and Food. And you can check if an area is under any form of subsidies. Now, I must admit that I'm not sure if you can get personal data there, like who is the owner and things like that. I think you can get maybe the farm number, but that's about it. But definitely you can Google it up and you can see, okay, around my village, which areas are subsidized maybe, which are receiving some payments. So it's quite easy to get around, but yeah, the full set is available to the evaluators. The managing authority just agrees with paying agency and they were willing to give us all the data. It's just the kind of time consuming to extract it from their system. We have to specify exactly what we want and what we need. So that's it. In terms of trees outside of the forest, we actually didn't really make a detailed analysis of that. We found a bit beyond our means, and it was just a stretch too far. But I think it could be analyzed by looking at the size and patterns of the LPS data, because the level of detail of LPS is more and more increasing, and now you can see inside also the tree features that are kind of cut out of these subsidized areas. Okay? Then for your question, we actually looked at LPS for individual submeasures. We used each, let's say, layer separately, so that we did not need so much computing power. It was still a lot, especially for the submeasures that were very popular, like this sustainable livestock farming. But for measures for wet meadows or conservation of butterfly habitats, it's actually, they didn't have so many beneficiaries, so it was not so difficult. And then you form several layers, and then you can use them interchangeably or kind of glue them together, let's say. Because otherwise, I know, server capacity is the problem with these things. For case studies, we actually selected them on the basis of data availability. We wanted to see the areas where there was not only the land use mapping available, because land use is mapped every 3 to 4 years for the entire country, but it's very rough. It just says arable land, grassland, orchard, vineyard, and so on. We checked the National Institute for Nature Conservation database for the areas where they have mapped habitats over the past, either them or municipalities. Whoever maps the habitats, the data go into the Nature Conservation Institute database. And we found out that only Ljubljana, More, and Goričko have 2 different data sets which can be then compared. Because this is completely ad hoc, it depends if there's money available. And Ljubljana More is the best because it's close to the capital. It's also a very rich municipality, and they can afford having several habitat mapping. And Goričko, they mapped it when they established the regional park, and then a couple of years later, so again. In other areas, we don't have this repetitive. And there we have habitats mapped according to the Natura 2000 methodology, where we can also see the level of species, let's say. It's useful in more detail.
Okay, we will have to start now being very quick because we have to go to the last presentation. Did you have still one more, or?
Concerning other measures promoting biodiversity, it's tough, I must admit. We will try to see through LPs where they were implemented and try to come up with some sort of proxy estimates depending on type of investment that was done there. And concerning GIS, I would just like to say that we had to use GIS because Natura 2000 sites, if I could just show you here, for example, are quite big, like this Ljubljana More, and the whole Natura is quite big. So one aspect is, yes, looking at the database of recipients, if they are in Natura 2000 or not. But here, you see, if you are, say, for corncrake, if you have a recipient over here, it's not that big effect as if you subsidize a recipient over here where it's the core area of this species. Also, some of the landowners live outside. The farms are actually outside of the area. It's just the farm land that it's inside. But I agree that we should compare the farms that are supported and not supported. And this, of course, here there are unsupported farms mostly. We should look what is there. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.